Alrighty. Okay, so there's a kind of a lot of ground to be covered here because the last time you came was, I think, late '84. And since that time, I think you've actually come out with a 12-inch single,
Yeah.
Which was instrumental.
That's right.
Yeah.
Compilation cassette as well.
Compilation cassette. Maybe you can kind of fill us in on what you've been doing since that time, since Brilliant Trees.
After I finished here in '84, I was doing the preparation for a Journey video for a Japanese company. And part of that video I was quite pleased with, a section of it called Still Cathedrals. But the soundtrack I felt I could improve on, so I went back to London and started work on that. To persuade the record company to finance the project, I said I would record another piece of music so that they could put it together as an album. And that's why I started on Words with Shaman. It's a very complicated story. It's not really worth going into. There was a lot of diplomacy involved in the financing of the recording. What I ended up with was the EP, Words with the Shaman, and a limited edition video cassette of Still Cathedrals. And a compromise was the Alchemy cassette, which was really the record company wanted to release an album, but I didn't really want that, so I just did a limited edition cassette instead. And at the same time as I was recording Shaman, I had started work on some of the vocal material of Contour. I recorded 3 tracks. I recorded Wave, After Forgetting, Before the Bullfight. So that gave me kind of a firm foundation for that album, because included in those tracks were most of the musicians I intended to use for the whole album: Bill Nelson, Robert Fripp, Steve Jansen, Kenny Wheeler. So that's where it started from. And after I finished those 3 tracks, I took some time off, started writing again. Knew who I was writing for, which helped me a great deal.
Which was what?
Musician-wise.
Oh, I see.
Arrangement-wise.
Who you're to be working with, yeah.
And I went back in the studio, I think it was February this year, and did a month, 5 weeks up in Oxfordshire, in a manor, which was really beautiful and worked well for the recording. I mean, it was a perfect setting for the recording. And I suppose all in all, it took me 3 months to record the album, double album, with it was stretched over a long period of time.
Just out of curiosity, whatever became of the Journey project for the Japanese company?
Well, it was released here in Japan.
It was released here?
Yeah.
Under what title?
Preparation for a Journey.
Preparation for a Journey. What was it like? I mean, how were you satisfied with the final product?
I had mixed feelings about it. The section, as I said, that I liked was the Still Cathedral section, which was the end section of the video. I find it very difficult to... I mean, I was asked really to write a script and co-direct a video that was meant to be a documentary about myself, and it's very hard to be objective about that. Mm-hmm. So what I did was include these sections in it that were basically just visuals and music, and hopefully my choice of visuals and music would tell them something about my character, more than my sitting there chatting away. I think that it was semi-successful from my point of view. I like the end section. I think it's the best thing I've ever done on video.
Words with a Shaman and Still Cathedrals. There are these religious ideas being brought in. What is this always been sort of an interest of yours?
Well, it's become more and more a fascination of mine, and maybe more than a fascination. I suppose for many years I'd been questioning my own religious beliefs, which I'd never really done before, which I kind of had for many years, a kind of childlike belief in God, and I never questioned it. And then there came a point when I began to question it, and I just started searching for something that a kind of some values that I could live by or guide my life or something like that, and I found something that I think is a good foundation from which to build from, and it's creeping into the music because it's so important to me in my life.
Is this something you worked out on your own or an established religion?
Mainly worked out on my own, but obviously from reading a great deal of literature. I guess I'm interested in both ends of the scale, the more practical approach to spiritual awareness and also the mystical side. I'm really not sure where my heart lies, which one I would choose to follow if I had to make a decision. I find them both fascinating at the moment. I mean, trying to reach the same aim ultimately. It's really what's best suited for me as an individual.
It's funny because not only is there sort of a spiritual and metaphysical side to religion, but when it comes to music, there's also a sort of aesthetic. There's like a pop aesthetic. Anything from a silly cross worn by Madonna. Well, of course, not silly to people who believe in it, but anything from that to say like a U2. When they do that hymn, I forgot what it's called, but they do a version of a hymn.
Did they?
Yeah, it's something the whole crowd joins in at the shows and stuff.
Yeah.
It's a very vague sort of aesthetic. Well, I guess you'd call it, they take nothing more than the aesthetics of religion and incorporate it into their music. Does that have something to do with yours? You're using a title like Words with a Shaman?
I don't think so. I hope that there's a more profound statement made. I hope it's not as superficial as that. You could say, I don't know, but U2 using a hymn could be just used for the sense of glory that comes with the hymn. There's a sense of drawing people together, and it's almost like a football crowd you could have, cheering along to singing a hymn. It could have that effect, and it could be a useful tool to just like Madonna wearing crosses. I hope the work I'm doing has a little more meaning than that, because in my life, the idea of spiritual awareness has become all important, you could say.
The words to your music, although on the surface seem very simple, also I think when viewed as a whole tend to be rather obtuse. For example, the one about the bullfight, I was just kind of reviewing the tape upstairs before the interview here, and it's sometimes kind of hard to grasp your meaning. Do you ever consider that a dilemma?
Well, I try not to make the lyrics too abstract. It's very easy to become very abstract if you're talking about things relating to spiritual awareness or religion in a broader sense. It's very easy to become... the lyrics can become very pie in the sky type lyrics. I try to steer away from that. I try to keep it very down to earth. What I try to do is to write lyrics that work on a couple of levels. Before the Bullfight's a good example. Before the Bullfight, you could say it's about the taking on the problems that arise in life, a willingness to go through life, accepting whatever comes your way. And at the same time, it has to do with the duality of man, the battle between the animal nature of man and the spiritual nature of man. So that's one example of how I approach the lyric writing. I do the same with love songs. I try to use the man-woman relationship to relate to something higher as well. So Brilliant Trees is a good example of that. I think it probably the most successful, the title track Brilliant Trees, probably the most successful song I've written in that way. It works on a man-woman level, and it works on a much higher level. It has this spiritual quality to it.
Have you ever encountered lyrics like that you felt successfully conveyed or posed questions in regard to spiritual considerations?
Other people's lyrics?
Yeah.
I can't say offhand I have, but I suppose if you get a person that writes lyrics that are of a very personal nature, they can come close to an understanding of the human condition in a way, and that also relates, I think, to what we're talking about. I like Nick Drake's lyrics. I think maybe they could be maybe a little dated now, but they are very personal. They meant something to him at the time, and they still come across as something very, very personal. And there are a few writers like that. I like the writing on Scott Walker's last album, Climate of Hunter. I find that touches on something. They're very poetic lyrics,
Let me ask you how you got together with some of the people on the record, Robert Fripp, Bill Nelson. How did those collaborations go?
I met Bill a couple of months after I finished Brilliant Trees. He appeared on TV. He had to actually review Brilliant Trees on TV.
Bill Nelson on TV?
Yes.
What program was this?
It was called, what was it called? Something like 7 Days. I'm really not sure.
The BBC?
7 days a week, I think it was called, BBC. and he was one of the panel that had to review the albums that week, and my album happened to be on there, and he happened to give it a really nice review. And I had my exhibition, the Polaroid exhibition, was following a couple of days later, so I invited him down. I mean, we had loads of mutual friends, but we'd never met, and I thought this was a good chance to actually meet. And we got on well. We have lots of things in common, lots of interests in common. And it was in the back of my mind, it would be really nice to work with him at some point. And when I decided to make the album a guitar-orientated album, Bill was one of the people on the top of the list to choose from. Robert Fripp, it really only came to my mind when I was working on the track Wave, which was one of the first 3 vocal pieces I recorded. I got to a point in the composition where I needed an improvised performance to break up the rigid structure of the piece. And I tried various kinds of instruments, and none of them worked. They all sounded a little too conventional. And one evening, Robert Fripp came to mind. I thought, yes, it'd be perfect. And so I got in touch. Unfortunately, he was in London doing the rounds of playing the record shops. And he came up the following evening and performed on the record, did the thing in 1 or 2 takes. He enjoyed working on it. We got on well together. Again, we had interests in common. And after I went back to writing more material, we got in touch, and he expressed a wish to continue working with me if I needed him. And of course, that was very flattering. And I kept this all in mind while I was writing the material, as I said.
So you basically were able to get together with musicians you wanted then?
I've always been very lucky. I mean, I try not to choose session musicians. I try to choose musicians that have a certain quality that I admire in their music. And I've been very lucky. They just say yes.
I'm very familiar with the previous work of those 2 guys.
Oh yes. I'm a great admirer. I've followed their work for many, many years.
Was that right? Huh. Like Bill Nelson, I think, has kind of a problem getting his stuff out to people. He's got his own private mailing list, apparently.
That's right.
But you must feel a certain identification, I guess, with that kind of performer, because he doesn't really compromise or...
That's right. I mean, Bill has many problems. I think many people do that try to follow their own way instead of conforming to the music business. You end up on the breadline somehow, and you're always struggling against financial problems. And I know Bill has suffered from that for a very long time. But he's such a prolific writer. He writes every single day. He's recording every single day because he has his home studio. And I think that's the best work he does. The instrumental work from the home studio is excellent. He released a box set of albums called Trial by Intimacy. I think it was 4-record set. It was excellent material.
Is that right?
Yeah, excellent.
Did you, the idea to do the instrumental, that wasn't a hint taken from him, or was it?
I don't think so, because it's something I've really been working towards for a long time. I mean, even in Japan, we always thought one day Japan was going to do an instrumental album, but we split up before it was ever done. It's something I've always wanted to do. And it just happened. I didn't plan it. I started writing the vocal album, and during the same period, this material started coming about. It was really a kind of formula, kind of composition, as they were made up of guitar tape loops. And once I'd struck on the formula, I was writing this material every day, and I ended up with quite a great deal of material for the instrumental album. So it was all written around the same period. It just really happened. I didn't really plan it. But I mean, instrumental albums is something, or instrumental music is an area I'm very interested in to this point in time.
Do you have any objection to it being labeled atmospheric music?
Well, it really all depends how people respond to that. I mean, in Japan they say BGM, and
That's right.
in the West it's Muzak. I think it's very different from BGM or Muzak, as that tries to create a kind of false sense of security, a kind of comforting cushioning.
It's also very condescending.
Yes, very condescending. I relate the work I'm doing more to something like Brian Eno's been working on ambient music, but I mean it's not quite in the same vein. I call it environmental music, in that I hope, if I'm successful, and maybe not with this album, maybe in future projects, it should create a kind of harmony between you and your environment, especially the urban environment, which really helps the individual to maintain their own state of calm rather than dictating to them or like you said, this condescending approach that music has. So I think, music has that property, and it's an area that really hasn't been explored that much. And I think, as I said, in the urban environment, it's something we definitely need. For instance, if you're in a landscape, you can experience certain feelings that coexist. Feelings of loneliness, sadness, isolation, and at the same time a kind of joy of life, a power and a unity with nature. And that's something, in a way, we can miss in the urban environment. And I think music can help bring back those emotional experiences. And that's something I like to try to do through music.
I realize it's probably hard to be objective, but when you're listening to your own music, do you find yourself able to kind of detach yourself from the physical, the environment you're in?
When writing and recording it, it's a little easier. When I've finished it, it takes a while for me to separate myself from the music. I mean, even now I can't really tell how successful for me Gone to Earth is. I'm too close to it. It will take at least 6 months to a year before I can listen to it as a listener and not as its creator. I can do that now with Brilliant Trees. I listen to it and it seems totally separate from me, as if I had nothing to do with its creation. And that's the good time to judge the material.
Did you encounter much opposition when you decided to come up with a half and half format, half vocals and half instrumentals?
Virgin weren't interested and aren't interested in my instrumental material.
Is that right?
I'm signed as a vocal artist, and basically that's what they want, vocal material. So there is a conflict there, and there are compromises made which aren't to do with music but to do with contractual compromises. There we go.
But you were able to get it out, though.
Yeah, I was told that I was to record the vocal album and do the instrumental album in my spare time. So in other words, every morning and every evening, any spare hour that I had, I would work on the instrumental album, and during the daytime, when the other musicians were around, I'd work on the vocal album. So it was really like unbalanced in a way, that there wasn't enough time spent on the instrumental album, not as much as I would have liked to have spent on it.
They kind of put you on thin ice then.
Yeah.
Well, you can do it, but if the vocals aren't up to par, forget it.
Yeah. Well, it's really, if you don't finish the vocal album on budget, if you finish the instrumental album first, we'll be very unhappy. What they hope is that if I finish the vocal album on budget and the instrumental album isn't finished, I put my own money into it to finish it. That's basically what they hope. Fortunately, it worked out okay. And when the album was finished, they wanted to split the two. They wanted to release them separately, which I thought was silly. I mean, first of all, if you look at it from a totally commercial point of view, you're only going to reach a limited amount of audience with the instrumental music. So why not create your market by releasing them together? And therefore, the people that are interested in the vocal music will buy the double album and eventually listen to the instrumental album, maybe buy my next instrumental work if they like it. So that's just from a commercial standpoint, it would make sense, and that's how I persuaded them. But for me, there was a continuity which ran through both albums, and I just couldn't split them up. It was important to keep them together.
Yeah, somehow I can just see those guys around a table there at the record company saying, boy, a double album is death, and especially when the second record is all instrumental.
Yeah.
Well, I recall even Bill Nelson once put out a double album with, I think one of the records was nothing but the Beauty and the Beast soundtrack.
Yes.
And I'll tell you the truth, I really don't listen to that very much. It's just the vocal, so
yeah.
It is. You do tend to, I think, focus on that type of thing. But what's the future of ambient music, though? How is this going to get to the people? Because let's face it, people really don't feel that inspired to go out and buy it, unless there's a reason.
Yes, it's true. I think that many people don't know how to listen to it or how to use it is really the question. How to educate an audience into understanding how to use this music. I think it's going to be a very slow process. Mm-hmm. But if you take the New Age music in America, that's already got a big market now. And sure, the music isn't really what we're talking about. It's not creative in that sense, not really what we call ambient or environmental music, but it's created an audience, created a market. And in England now, that there are a couple of companies that are thinking of starting up this special labels for instrumental music, Virgin being one of them. And hopefully they'll allow more scope for a more creative form of music to come out of that, rather than stick to the formula that the Americans are stuck to with the New Age. So there's hope. I mean, I look upon the whole thing as being optimistic. I think that there's a chance that they could start financing interesting instrumental projects in the future. Because I know a lot of friends that are interested, young people that are interested in making instrumental music that are, as I said, are on the breadline, and they're given these pathetic budgets to work with. And so consequently you end up with substandard productions on the albums, which again makes people wary of buying these things. So it's a vicious circle.
Was Eno's album ever played in an airport? That's one thing.
I think it was played. I don't know. I think it was written for the Cologne airport. I don't know if it was ever played there.
I'd always wondered about that.
Yeah.
The actual, if that's been put to use.
Yeah.
Just a little thought of mine. You've been stigmatized with another label, and that cerebral music. What do you think of that? I mean, Robert Fripp, for years, always said, well, when I started telling people that, people with brains could actually perform rock and roll, they thought I was crazy. And he's always been somewhat proud of his intellectual, cerebral aspirations. How about in your case? Is that a legitimate stigma, or is it something you also...
No, it's something I'm really rather against. I hate the idea that my music could be labelled intellectual or whatever. I'm definitely not an intellectual.
Well, you read. Anybody who reads more than one book a year is an intellectual.
I'd have trouble spelling the word. I think that an intellectual approach to music is a negative one. It really has to write music. You really have to be receptive, open. And I think if you're working from the mind, you're very closed. So I would say I was an instinctive writer, in that I try to remain open-minded. If we believe, as I do, that music comes through you and not from you, then you really have to just say that you have to remain a good receptor to whatever's coming through you. And that's got nothing to do with the intellect. I'd say the intellect robs you of the beauty of inspiration.
Well, they also talk about, the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain, how one's for intellectual pursuits and the other's for creative pursuits. So I guess there is sort of an instinctive clash there.
Yeah, I mean, because we're talking about things like, if you say spiritual or whatever, people interpret these things in different ways. And obviously I think about these things a great deal. It's not as if I approach the work mindlessly, really with a kind of vacant mind waiting for inspiration. I try to concentrate my mind onto one area and then wait for inspiration to come from that point, if you like. It's like almost a form of meditation, if you like. So yes, there's a lot of thought that goes into it before and after, but the point of inspiration must be as pure as possible. I mean, an ideal, obviously you don't always live up to that. There are contrived compositions, but it's an ideal you try to stick to.
Mm-hmm. I guess it's also, it boils down to a matter of the artist just sort of dealing with material that's close to him. Madonna singing about, how a pregnant teenager is insisting on having her baby. Well, that obviously means a lot to her. But then I guess in your case you have other matters that concern you that are not dealt with merely because they're intellectual pursuits per se. It just happens that spirituality is
close to my heart.
That's
point,
right,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you perform live at all now?
No, I haven't performed live since Japan did their last tour.
So you're not interested in performing live then?
Interested, yes. The recording takes precedence over everything else, and as long as I've got new ideas for new recordings, I think I have to pursue these. To do a tour on any scale really would take up a great deal of time, and your heart really has to be in it to do it. So I really have to wait until the recording idea is at a point where I think, well, it's time to take a break, which isn't now. I thought when Japan split up, I'd wait until I'd at least finished the third vocal album. I thought this would give the audience an idea of the direction I was going in, so it wouldn't come really out of curiosity. They'd have an understanding of what to expect. Give me enough material to perform live instead of relying on old material, and really just prepare me mentally for what I want to do. I don't want to do the standard rock pop performance, which is really entertainment, pure entertainment. I want to do something that's interesting from my point of view, from the musician's point of view on stage, so hopefully using a certain amount of improvised material live. I'm interested in another kind of performance, and that's a kind of improvised ambient music, which is on a totally different scale, and something I'm very interested in, which would be performing in very small clubs, galleries, chapels, things like places like this, having maybe 4 or 5 musicians that respond to the environment you're working in that evening and to the feeling the audience brings with them, and just creating an atmosphere that we share with the audience. So the audience don't really come along to listen to somebody play a wonderful guitar solo or hear me sing. They come to share in an experience, and that's something I would find very interesting to pursue.
They would just be sitting there observing what you're doing, though.
Sitting there experiencing what's happening rather than observing. I think that's the idea, not to observe, but just to experience the mood in the room, if you like.
Seems like it would be difficult unless they were actually involved in something, interacting with each other, with you on stage. Like, say if you were playing a cocktail party or something.
Yeah.
Somebody's talking about a soccer game here, and somebody's
yeah,
talking
that's
about
very
somebody's
different.
gossiping here, and you kind of play along with that.
Well, I remember Eric Satie had the same ideas. He set up a quartet in the corner of a room of a gallery, and they were playing this kind of ambient music, if you like. I think he called it furniture music. And the people were meant to ignore the music really and just carry on walking around, looking at the pictures and having conversations among themselves. Of course, this didn't happen. They all grouped around the quartet and listened, which upset them a great deal. But it's an idea that should work in principle. I think, again, it's a matter of educating an audience of how to use this, or how to experience it, I suppose.
Now that you mentioned Satie, it does kind of come to mind that this is sort of a European thing,
Yes, I think so. I think it's a very European.
Because it doesn't really deal with gut instincts or spontaneity. It seems to be a very...
Well, it has something to do with spontaneity. It has to do with sensitivity. There are only a few musicians I know that could respond to an atmosphere in a room. If I walk into a room, I get a certain feeling immediately. And I can respond to that musically if the situation was right, if it was all set up. And I think there are other musicians that could do that, and that really just comes down to sensitivity. And of course, sensitivity is something that the audience must have as well to be able to respond to it and appreciate it. So it's really a heightening of sensitivity, of awareness, if you like, which I think we are working towards generally, evolving towards, if you like, generally, universally.
Do you hear much from your old Japan fans? I mean, you had a large following here. Do you think a lot of them have stuck around?
First of all, we were very aware when Japan was at its most successful that there was a large percentage of that audience which really was just that kind of fashion-orientated audience. You knew were going to switch off of Japan and turn on to something else next. But before we became that fashionable, there was a kind of group of people that were following us and followed our career for a long period of time. And I think they're still there, or at least a large percentage of those people are still there. And maybe some of those younger people that really, clued into Japan on the fashion side have grown up and are sort of working their way along to understanding the music as well. So, yes, I think there's a large percentage of that audience, of my audience, is still made up of the people that enjoy Japan's music. But of course, I'm aware that my popularity dwindles every time I produce an album of this nature. It's something I have to live with because you're working with material that could only appeal to a minority audience.
Do you think you're mainly catering to a type of audience that would, say, follow contemporary music or multimedia stuff like Bill Nelson?
I think at the moment my audience is slightly broader because of where I've come from. There are people that are trying to understand what I'm leading towards, and I appreciate that. I mean, I'm very interested in that these people are looking for something. I also think there's another audience that's waiting for the people that grew up with pop music that are now disillusioned with it, that can find nothing satisfactory or substantial in pop music, looking for something else in music that will give them something of substance. And I think there's a large market out there actually just groping for the right form of music, and some of those people have found that in my music, and so I'm kind of reaching a new audience at the same time. Not to say that I don't think the sales are going to rocket enormously, but I think that there will come a time when the sales will become very stable, kind of losing one audience and creating another. I hope that this will happen also for people whose music like Bill, like Robert. I think I'm very lucky just because of the background I came from.
How about in your own case, though? You obviously have evolved quite a bit since the early days of Japan. Obviously, you have become disillusioned with standard forms of rock and pop. Mm. In what ways were you disillusioned, and what accounted for that sort of change in yourself?
Well, Japan was working within the confines of pop and trying to do something interesting within the confines of pop, at least towards the end of its career. But there came a point where you realised you could only go so far, that pop music was generally superficial and trivial, and that generally the media and the public never really went beyond the image. And this was something that began to be frustrating, and obviously I played the games. I played the games of image and building up these images, if you like, that I knew that the public could follow very easily. And most pop musicians do that and have done it for many years. There came a point when I just didn't want to continue to do that. I wanted to do something on a more humane level. I wanted to write about experiences that weren't hidden behind imagery, that I tried to write directly from emotional experiences. I really didn't know if I was capable of doing that, and it took me about 1.5 years before I managed to write the first thing that I was happy with, which was Forbidden Colours, which I thought was the first time I'd ever really got down to that level of writing. And I've been working along those lines ever since, trying to perfect it, if you like, in some way, to make myself more open, not to be so protective about my own feelings. And it's very difficult. I mean, sometimes I've sat in a room full of musicians listening back to the track we've all been playing on, and I feel suddenly very embarrassed because I'm listening to the lyrics and there's something very personal in the lyrics, and it feels strange to be sitting in a studio with a group of people listening to this. But I think it's very important. I think it's important to be as open as possible. I try not to write about just my experiences, but more the emotions and the thoughts that accompany the experience, so that when other people listen to the music, they don't relate to the songs and think, that's what he's been through, that's, and create this kind of hero worship image. They respond to it in a personal way. They think, yes, I've experienced that, and I know what he's talking about, and they relate to it in their own lives. And I think that's the only way music could ever have a lasting quality, is when music can be personalised in that way, become involved in the people's lives rather than remain outside and entertain them,
Do you see any direction that popular music is going in? Like, for example, if I could say 100 years ago, a person in the United States, when they were a child, they'd learn some song by Sylvian Foster. When they're 85 years old, they're still singing the same songs, whenever the family got together and sit around a piano. Now, we're exposed to cultures all over the world, music all over the world. Kids who listen to Madonna, may have happened upon the drums of Burundi through Peter Gabriel or something, And, people's tastes as a result of this change very rapidly. I mean, you've obviously been through many changes. I've been through many changes. What do you think the direction what is the eventual direction we point in after all this exposure? You think it's become sort of a personalized thing, that the type of thing you're aiming for?
Well, I think there's two ends of the scale. I think that music is becoming more and more commercial, more and more trivial, and working towards pop music. This is working towards just a mass form of entertainment on one level. And then there's the other end of the scale, where people are trying to do something a little more interesting, and where all these crossover influences are happening. I'm not really sure where that will lead. I know that John Hassell and Peter Gabriel do talk about a kind of universal form of music. I guess that there'll come a point where we'll reach something along those lines that will always be evolving and changing. I must admit, it's not something I'm that interested in. I'm really interested in pockets of traditional forms of music that come from only isolated areas. These forms of music do have a universal quality about them. There are certain albums I could play to people all over the world. I mean, there's the famous Bulgarian choir one. I don't know if you've heard that.
That's right.
But I've played to many people in different countries, and everybody responds to it in the same way. It's highly emotional, moving music, but it comes from one isolated, located area. So I don't see that there's a need for music cross over to become universal. I think that music from all parts of the world have universal quality about them. I couldn't really say where it was heading. At one point I thought when synthesizers were introduced, I thought one day, as in the old days, there'll be a synthesizer in every home, and people would really write for themselves and compose for themselves. I still think that's very possible in the same way as people did with the piano. I can't see where it's leading. I think, in a way, I agree with Joseph Beuys that the individual is a very creative person, human being, and it's really they should be able to touch on that in some way. And I think just trying to bring that into everyday life. And the synthesizer could do that, I think, from people with a musical interest, just being one example. I think it will really come down to that every human being a creative individual. I'm not sure that we will all need to be buying records in the very distant future.
Do you think that having a synthesizer is anything different from having a voice, though? Voice can be changed in a lot of different ways. And
Sure.
you can whistle.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, the voice, yes, is a good instrument, and everybody... But I don't think people really start making up their own songs. I think a lot of people do. I know people send me lyrics all the time, kids are writing lyrics and so on. But I think an instrument of some kind brings a different frame of mind to music. It makes you start creating or composing on a different level. It doesn't have to be a synthesizer, but it's just that's the most immediate. I mean, anybody can play a synthesizer. And I think as we go on, people will become more sound conscious. And developing sounds and synthesizers is a very fascinating thing to do. It comes down to the ambient form of music we were talking about. I mean, I could see people creating that kind of music at home. And Robert talks about that. Robert Fripp, with the Frippatronics, he says he'd like to make a setup in his own home with speakers in every room, and just one morning get up, write a new line on the Frippatronics equipment, and just leave it running for the whole day. So that's the mood for the day, if you like. I mean, I think that's an idea that could be brought into every home if everybody had the facilities. And in the future, why not? Technology is becoming easier and easier.
Just one last thing here. I should ask you what you're going to be doing from here on in.
Well, there's a couple of collaborative projects that are kind of in the air, which may come about. But I won't talk about those specifically. I will probably do a vocal EP next of material that's just left over from the album and material that I've written since. Just to really kind of clear my system of that.
So soon, though, after just putting out the last...
Well, it's a very prolific period for me. I don't seem to stop writing, and I keep having these ideas. I have an idea for another instrumental album, which might take a time to write, but it's already taking form in my mind, and it's something I would like to do. I finished an album, almost finished an album with Holy Shukai, which is an instrumental album. Again, which works along the environmental lines we're talking about. I've sung on the Nick Khan's new album, a couple of tracks on that. I can't really say, other than the EP, I can't say what the next project will be. If one of the collaborative projects come up, I think I'll take it on, because it will give me time to think about really what's closest to my heart and what I want to pursue.
But you'll basically be just in London, in and out of the studio?
I think so, for at least the next 6 months. And maybe this time next year think about taking on the tour of some kind or another. But I'm very close to heavily involved in music at the moment, and I really don't want to break up the momentum of what's been happening over the past 2 years.
Well, sounds good. I guess that'll do it then.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the time.
Yes, pleasure.
You don't have many of these interviews scheduled?
No, I mean, the schedule's been very easy. Yeah. It was really just doing, just in the whole trip of Europe. And I'm meant to be going on to Australia. That's becoming more and more doubtful as the days progress, but it's been okay. I mean, I was in the right frame of mind to take it on, really. It's not something I could do by myself.